So let me tell you, I feel your pain. If you've ever had a leaking fuel line, I'm going to show you a super cheap, super effective way that you can actually repair that without replacing every single portion of the line. So we need to get going on this, and I'm going to explain to you how to get this thing apart. Well, we obviously got a leaky fuel line, so we're going to cut into this fuel line without replacing the whole fuel line, go down to the parts store with the parts that we take off of it, just to make sure we get the right size lines and etc., and put her back together. If yours is leaking through the threads, you can go down to the hardware store and pick up some plumber's tape or Teflon tape and try to wrap the line. And you want to wrap that on your threads. If you believe it's leaking through the threads, which I think it is in my situation right here, we're going to go clockwise, because when we go to spin the two components together, they're going to spin clockwise, and we don't want the tape to bunch up underneath there on the threads, or it won't plug it off. Okay, so no matter where you're going to fix the line at, even if you were just taking a chunk out because you had a rusty part, whatever the situation is, we're going to use what's called a compression fitting. So we need it to be in a square, flat spot, so it needs to run at least congruent. You don't want to cut it on an angle like this right here. So we're going to go ahead and cut this off. Now they have line cutting tools. In this situation, a line cutting tool would be best because it's fuel. But if you're like me and you're going to end up using a pneumatic sawzall like this, just grab some grease and put it on the end of there. I've done this quite a few times. I've never started a fire, but I always keep a fire extinguisher handy. And if I had a line cutting tool here at the house, I would certainly use it. I'm going to cut it back here because this looks like a pretty good spot that's not rusted. And I've also got a pair of vice grips on here just so I can stabilize the line itself so it doesn't sit there and move. And more than likely you're dealing with a rusted line, and what you don't want to have is a break down on further down the line. So we're going to do it that way. Okay, so we went down to the parts store. We picked up a line cutting tool so we could clean up that end where we cut it off with my hacksaw. If you got one of these already, that'll be super helpful. We picked up what's called a compression fitting. We picked up a piece of, and if the doesn't screw into your fuel filter, like it won't in this situation, we're going to reuse our old line nut. Now, what that's going to involve is us taking this portion of the line out of there so we can reuse it. If you're replacing and you're just putting in a chunk, all you're going to need is two of these and one. And I'm going to show you exactly how these compression fittings work and why they actually work. And they work super well, even on high pressure situations. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start cutting this line to the appropriate length that we need, and we're going to remove one of these barreled ends. Now luckily we're not going to have to crimp this end because it's going inside here. If you were making the and just using two compression fittings like this, you would cut off both ends of it because this will slide into the compression fitting and lock it together. When using a line cutter, you're going to put it on the line and you're going to spin it several times around and around, probably 4 or 5 times. And as you do that, you're going to gradually tighten up the line cutter itself, and eventually it'll start making a little groove inside there, and it'll cut the line off flush and square and be a really nice cut. That's the kind of cut you're looking for, nice and straight and even. Okay, so I'm going to show you folks why this works. When you take these apart, there's going to be 2 little brass bushings that go inside there. Now they are directional, and you do need to put these in with them facing the small portion, tapered portion, facing the bottom half of your extension. So when you go to put this on here, you're going to actually slide that taper portion onto your line, just like this. And it's not going to bottom out. What's going to happen is that part of the line is going to bottom out on the inside of there. So when you go to put this up inside here, it's going to crush it against there. So be mindful of that and do that the correct way, and you will not have any leaks whenever you connect the lines together. Now, when you're working on a scenario like me and you're replacing part of the line that's actually going to go inside the fuel filter, it doesn't really matter if you have a standard or metric line, but if the line nut is metric, you need to take it off of the other one like I explained before. Then you can quite simply slide the line nut over the end of it to the bevel, and that will allow you to not have to remake this bevel or flare this out inside your house if you don't have the tools for that. Now, because mine wouldn't slide down on this line very well, I just took and ground a little bit off of here, so when my line nut gets there, it'll actually spin, and then I'll take the line nut itself, and I'll just take it and I'll strike it down on the tabletop, and then hopefully when I get it down there to the bottom, it'll spin. After a little bit of work, it'll actually spin a lot better. But now we can insert it into the fuel filter and cut the line to the appropriate length. Make sure that your line nut is slid down to the end. I'm sure it'll compress in there as long as you can get it to screw into the component that it's going in, maybe a wheel cylinder or whatever. Just make sure it's pretty close to the end. Now with that turn inside there, we can lock it down and then put it on the car. Okay, since my line that connects to the other end is plastic, I can pretty much cut this wherever I want. I just want to get a good idea where to cut it. So I want to cut it back here a little bit so I can connect it right there to this one. I'm also going to cut the end of this off right here to make it a little bit smoother connection because I cut this with my Sawzall. So make sure you have a good flat surface to connect to. So what you do is you put your line connector on there, you tighten it up, and then you just spin it around, and you spin it 3, 4, 5, 6 times until it starts getting loose, and then you turn that just a little bit more to make it cut in a little bit deeper, a little bit more, and eventually it'll cut that off nice and square and flat, and you'll have a good area to connect to. Then she falls out just like that. Now with this cut down to the size that I need, I can take part of my line nut, I can slide it on there. Since this particular compression fitting is double beveled and they're the same, I can just slide the nut, slide it onto the end of here. With that slid on there just like that, I can take the other portion of my compression fitting and put it over the top of there, and then bring my nut up and crush it down, making sure that it's bottomed out and pushed down on the line all the way. Now we'll tighten this side up before we even put it on the car, and then we'll install the other side and connect the fuel filter and check it for leaks. I will say that these have to be pretty tight, but generally what I do is tighten them up and then give them a quarter turn. If they need to be tightened up more, I do that later on after I start the vehicle and check it for leaks. Now you can take some emery cloth or some sandpaper or Scotch-Brite out of your wife's kitchen and clean the end of this off so it will slide on here better. I cannot stress enough how important it is to actually have that brass fitting down there and enough of line exposed to be able to crimp it on there. Then you can grab your wrenches and tighten it up, and you'll see the difference in how much I tightened it up in the next segment. So here comes the test. We'll see if it worked. Look at that, no leaks. That's sweet. If this video was helpful, please consider subscribing, clicking the notifications, sharing my videos, and giving me them sweet old thumbs up. Remember, if anyone else can do it, I promise you, you can do it too. God bless and have the best of days.